Now, have you ever thought that if you were to take out Jesus Christ of the Christian idea, the Christian principles, the Christian everything, what would you be left with? Because basically, he is the most significant person who ever walked this earth. And if you do take away Jesus Christ, then what have you got? You've just got basically a book. You've got a set of morals which help you along the way. But is that it? Is that enough? And in fact, here's one for you. Did Jesus Christ actually live? And what's the evidence outside of the Bible to say that he ever did exist? To answer this one, here's Tom Price from OCCA.
So we know that Jesus existed from a variety of different historical sources. And even though it's quite easy to sort of say the throwaway remark, oh, don't really think Jesus even existed, can we really know that? In fact, the evidence that Jesus was a real person in history is very, very strong. History gives us a number of reasons why we should take the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as trustworthy accounts of Jesus's life. So here are 6 quick reasons why we should take the Gospels as trustworthy accounts. And then after that, I'll talk about the evidence outside of the Bible for Jesus. So the New Testament documents are the best attested documents of antiquity in terms of the total number of manuscripts, in terms of the number of copies we have. Now that gives us a hope and a confidence that what was written was accurately preserved from the point it was written. There are questions still remaining about, well, what was written? Was that accurate itself? However, the interval between the original writing of those events and the date of the earliest copies of those events is also very, very short. So we have a short interval between the first writing and then having all those different copies. Then thirdly, the historic statements that are made about Jesus by ancient authors outside of the Bible, outside of the Gospels, matches well with what the Gospel writers write. So the picture that we get from sources outside of the Bible, outside of the Gospels, matches well with what the New Testament writers say, doesn't contradict. Fourthly, the authors of the 4 Gospels were either eyewitnesses of Jesus's life themselves, or they were closely associated to or had access to eyewitnesses. Fifthly, the Gospel writers were setting out to convey, and they were capable of conveying, accurate historical, factual information about Jesus. And the historical content, the core truth of their writings has been confirmed to a high degree. And then 6th point here is that the apostles' credibility as truth tellers, the general group of followers of Jesus, the apostles, is greatly strengthened when we realize that they had very little to gain and they had almost everything to lose, and they really did often pay for that with their lives and not say at that point, oh, sorry, this is all untrue, this is not real. They actually went through with it. They lost everything in order to proclaim Jesus as Lord and Savior and a real person. But what is the evidence outside of the New Testament? There's actually a huge amount of evidence outside the New Testament that matches and confirms the picture that the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Gospel and the other books or letters between the early churches write about Jesus. Here are 10 historical sources outside of the Bible which reveal information about Jesus that confirms or corroborates what those 4 New Testament gospel accounts say. So in Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, in his book Annuals, he wrote this. He was a Roman governor, and Edwin Yamauchi calls Tacitus probably the most important reference to Jesus outside of the New Testament. This is what he wrote. Nero fastened the guilt on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous suspicion, thus checked for the moment, again broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Well, what can we learn from this slightly unsympathetic reference to Jesus? Well, the fact is that people who were unsympathetic to Christianity and were mentioning the fact of Jesus' existence and what happened to Jesus. We can see that they took their name from Christ, that he suffered the extreme penalty, obviously alluding to the Roman method of execution by crucifixion, and it's dated to have occurred within the reign of Tiberius and by the sentence of Pontius Pilate. And this confirms much of what the Gospels tell us about the death of Jesus. We also find references in Suetonius, a Roman historian, in the life of Claudius. We find references in Josephus, a Jewish historian, in Antiquities. We find references in Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, in his epistles. In Pliny the Younger, we read in some letters and some between him and some other people. He was a governor between 109 and 111 AD in Bithynia and Pontus in northern Ephesus. He wrote this: "They were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, and they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it, after which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind." Well, it's good to hear early Christians weren't feasting too much, but clearly there are some commonalities there. Believing that Christ is God, believing that this would have an effect on their lives, committing themselves to truth-telling, gathering together, praying. This is exactly the picture that the New Testament presents, particularly the picture of the early Christians in the book of Acts, in the first couple of chapters of the book of Acts. We have further references in the Jewish Talmud. We have references in the Toledoth Jesu, in Lucian's writings. He was a Greek satirist writing in the 2nd century. We have references in Thallus, a Samaritan-born historian, in his book Histories, around AD 52. We have references in Mara bar Serpian in a letter. He was born in AD 73. We have Phlegon, a Roman historian, and he's mentioned by Origen as well. So these early sources outside of the Bible draw the following portrait of Jesus and the early Christians. This is what we could tell about Jesus without opening a gospel, without opening the Bible. He was a provocative teacher. He was a wise and virtuous man from the region of Judea. He reportedly performed miracles and made prophetic claims about what would happen in the future and what he was fulfilling. The Jewish leaders condemned him for acts of sorcery and apostasy. He was crucified by the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate around the time of the Jewish Passover during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius. Jesus's followers, called Christians, reported that he had risen from the dead, and the Christian faith had spread to Rome, where Christians were charged with crimes, and then they met horrible persecutions. First century Christians worshipped Jesus Christ as God and celebrated the Eucharist and met together for food. While at the time, the Romans ridiculed the followers of Christ as morally weak, these disciples were often known for their courage, their virtue, and their truth-telling. So the evidence seems to suggest that it is just not possible to sustain the idea that Jesus was just a projection, a figment of historical imagination. And if we hoped that we could get off the hook from Jesus's challenge to respond to his message and his claims to be God by writing him off as a legend, then I'm afraid history doesn't allow us to say that. Jesus himself provided all sorts of personal evidence: his teaching, his works, his character, his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, his resurrection. And as a result of these evidences, Jesus invited people around him to put their trust in him, to put their confidence in him. This for me was a revolution. When I arrived at university, I thought Christianity was an intellectual has-been. I didn't think it was a viable, serious option for thinking people in the modern world. I was confronted with the fact that there were not only good philosophical answers to the questions I had about God, about reality, that actually left me thinking, actually, I respect this Christian worldview quite a lot. I respect this perspective. But I was also impacted by reading about the evidence for Jesus, that he was a real person. Now, in Mark chapter 8, Jesus is walking with his disciples around some villages in Caesarea Philippi, and he turns to them and says, "Who do you say I am?" And their response is, well, some people say you're one of the prophets, some people say Elijah, some people say this person or that person. And he turns to them again and he pushes the question and says, "But who do you say I am?" And they respond by confessing that they think that he's the Christ, the anointed one of God. This was also my discovery. And at that point, I started to move from just believing, just sort of in a way hoping or thinking it was likely that he was God, to actually then having a friendship with him. I met him, he changed my life. And so the other evidence I have that Jesus is real, that he's God, is the evidence of him being my friend in my life. And this is a story you will hear from thousands, millions of Christians around the world. If you know a Christian, ask them what their story is and what their encounter and what their friendship with Jesus is like. But it's certainly not a figment of their imagination and based on real historical data.
Thank you very much, Tom. Absolutely marvelous. And as we say, Tom's going to be taking a sabbatical, if you want to call it that, and he'll be back with us in September because he's got a lot of studying to do. His PhD, he's working on that at the moment, which he told us is not due till what, 2026?
Yeah, 2026. But I mean, maybe I'll extend the sabbatical.
Leave it till the last minute. Bags of time. Leave it until the night before. Hand it in and you'll be absolutely fine. Tom, it has been a pleasure. You have a wonderful break and we'll see you back in September.
Oh, it's been lovely to be with you. If you want more information about the stuff I was talking about this morning, check out my Twitter, A Better Hope, one word, A Better Hope. And I've tweeted links to articles which go through that evidence in detail. So you can see for yourself what I've been saying is real and trustworthy. Bless you, Gareth. Love Connect. Keep listening, everyone.